HR department has transformed significantly from the task-oriented nature of administration, which it used to be followed in the late 1980s, and now it is viewed as one of the strategically focused extension of every firm, wherein which HR department always tries to put a sincere efforts with respect to following specific principles, which are always highlighted as one of the key important factors. When we talk in terms of principles, basically we are looking at mainly something called as a commitment, wherein which commitment is one aspect that most of the HR department always tries to deal with something called as job securities. And apart from the commitment, second one is something like competence, and which is considered as one of the other core principles that usually supports the company's growth and development, and it is also an aspect that affects employees job satisfaction and how well the company benefits the societies, and how well the success of a firm mainly depends on the competences. And apart from that, we are looking at the other different principles of HRM, like recruitment and selection, performance management, learning and development, succession plan, compensation and benefits, human HRIS, HR data and analysis, and these are some of the other important principles that mainly we are focusing our attention. And when we talk in terms of recruitment, which is basically focusing on something like employee recruitment, we all know that recruitment is a process which basically helps an organization to identify the talent gaps which usually exist in a company, and which always tends to give an opportunity in finding the right people to fill the right roles. And in order to achieve all these things, it has to go through something like job analysis, sourcing, screening and selection, and followed by selection of right candidates. All these things are one of the important factors which usually we relate to it. And when we talk in terms of performance management, we always relate to something like another core function of human resource management. Here in this process, we always tend to help the individual employees to give his 100% commitments with respect to performing whatever the task that is being assigned, and based on how well he is able to execute the task that is being assigned, will be keenly managed with respect to something like performance management. And the outcome of this performance management basically tends the organization to identify the gaps where an employee is very much lacking, and based on his shortcomings, the organization always tends to have a very strong learning and development department, which in turn are basically called as the employee department. Here, it always tends to take one aspect as the key factors with respect to tackling something called as the talent development. And this case always involves aligning the employee skills with the company needs. And in addition to hiring, training, and orienting the employees, HR department always puts an equal effort with respect to enhancing the career opportunities of an individual organization. On a whole, if we want to summarize the entire thing, we can say that HRM always refers to something like concentrating on identifying the right talent at the right time as well as the right place, and as well as HRM always tries their very hard with respect to seeing how well they are able to oversee the redundancy for companies, in what way it can able to downsize, and always the HR management will always try to look at how well they are able to meet up with the goals and objectives that is being set by the organization, in order to make sure that how well they are able to match up with their future growth and opportunities. And this is a stage where most of the organization would always like to uh, see how well they are able to see things with respect to development of the organization. And this is another important things where most of the organization would like to put their efforts in tackling those challenges that is being put across with respect to managing those things. And apart from that, even compensation and benefits are another key principles of the HRM, where equally any employee who is putting their hard effort should be properly rewarded, and is always liable to get a very good benefits based on his performance management. And nowadays, technology is taking the HR department to the next level thanks to a system called as HRIS system, which basically try to get the entire data of an individual employee regarding his past experiences, his key skill sets, and which are the areas he lacks, and all those things are basically outcome of something called as the HR data, which always most of the organization would like to analyze it and with the available data. And next thing is the difference between HRM and personal management. The main difference between the personal management and human resource management is the scope of the personal management is always limited, as we can see the slide. And when we look at these things, most of the cases wherein the workers are always viewed as a tool. Here, the behavior of the worker can always be manipulated as per the core competencies of the organization, and are always replaced when they are worn out. In other words, in other hand, when we talk in terms of HRM, it does always have something called as a wider scope and considers employees as their assets to the organization. And HRM always tends to promote their employees in a mutually agreed terms and goals, which always tends to give an equal responsibility and rewards across all the different economic performances, which helps the individual to achieve greater heights. We always tend to see that when we talk in terms of the approach of personal management, it is always considered to be very much traditional, in contrast with something called as a HRM, which is always considered as a modern concept. And when we talk in terms of treatment of manpower, basically in case of personal management, they always tend to treat their employees as machines or tools. But in case of HRM, they are always treated as assets. And when we talk in terms of the types of functions in personal management, employees will always given something called as a routine functions. But when we compare in terms of HRM, it is basically related to something like strategic function. And regarding basis of pay, it is based on job evaluation in the case of personal management, and transformational case in case of HRM. And with respect to communication, while personal management would always tend to go with respect to indirect communication, whereas modern HR always tries to have something like direct communication in the form of mail or face-to-face interactions. And in case of labor management, it is a collective bargaining contracts with respect to personal management, whereas in case of HR, they used to follow something like individual contracts. And the initiatives which are taken with respect to personal management is procedural, whereas in case of HR, it is basically a business needs. And in case of personal management, decision making was always very slow when we compare in terms of HR, which is always tends to be very fast. And when we talk in terms of managerial task, it is basically something like monitoring. But in case of modern HR, it is basically considered as something like nurturing an individual employee or a group of employees. And in good old days, the relationship what personal management usually would like to have was like labor and a employer relation. But nowadays, in case of HR, they usually treat their employees as their customer, because they think that the employees are the key pillar of an organization. And The speed of decision, as I said, it was very much slower when we compare in terms of HR, which is rather considered as a very fast thing. And when we talk in terms of rules, the, uh, the importance was given with respect to devising of clear roles and responsibilities. But nowadays, roles are getting changed every now and then based on the functionalities of how exactly the organization is able to extend its work functional across the different departments.